Hey everybody. So we're just going to go about a 10 or 15-minute presentation, a little bit more into some of the information from Harvard and some other sources. All right, and we're going to be taking a look at some pictures. This, of course, is familiar to us. This is the Harvard eating plate. I'm not going to talk through this because I know that we've seen this before. Same thing with the pyramid, Dr. Weil's pyramid. Again, we looked at that in the previous video. Um, I'm going to do a whole nother presentation on vegetarian and vegan presentations, but this is the vegetarian, essentially the same thing without any poultry or fish, and of course red meat isn't on there. And then the vegans take it one step further and remove all animal products. Um, so I know that there's a lot of debate right now over low carb diets versus plant based diets, and there's both groups have some good points. Certainly, the low carb people have been very critical of the refined carbohydrates in our diet, and that they should be because refined carbohydrates are probably one of the worst things in our diet right now. But the problem is when you're replacing that junky carbohydrate with an excessive amount of animal product, some health problems can result. And Harvard found this. They followed over 100,000 people for over a 20-year period, all of whom were on a low carb diet. And what they concluded that low carb diets based on animal sources actually increased risk for mortality in both men and women. There's been several other studies that found this as well. So there are certainly some short-term benefits to low carbohydrate diets, but the early evidence in right now is that low carb diets are not the ideal choice for the long run. When we're talking about you know, overall mortality and reducing morbidity risks. There's probably some weight loss benefits and things like that. The NIH did a huge study. It's the largest research study ever conducted, and they just found that dietary fat of animal origin was associated with increased risk for pancreatic cancer, among other things. Um, so plant-based diets, mostly plants, low in animal products. You know, Lean sources of animal proteins. That's pretty much what Harvard recommends. Um, and when you do eat meat, you should try and eat meat from a healthy source. There's a huge issue with factory farming. This is a kind of actually a slang word that they use. Sometimes they call it CAFOs, concentrated animal feed operations, and this is where a good part of the meat comes from. Um, the meat industry will have you believe, or try and have you believe, that the only people that are really critical of these operations are like the vegetarians and the PETA people. But actually, nothing could be further from the truth. The American Public Health Association called for a moratorium or an immediate cessation on CAFOs due to the significant public health burden that's caused there. It's just a great deal of pollution. They inject the animals with, they need to inject the animals with drugs because of the living conditions that they're in. Which, I mean, it's not horrible. It's just that when you see some pictures, it's certainly not the way that the animals were meant to be raised. And there's a big problem with antibiotic usage, overusage, I guess I should say. So it's a big debate, but overall, pretty much every major medical and public health group in the country has openly opposed factory farms, primarily for the overuse of antibiotics. But there's been some other concerns as well. So actually, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services now tells us that we should only be eating organic foods and eat only free-range meats raised without antibiotics and growth hormones. So we'll be looking at that information a little bit more when we cover environmental health, but that's something to consider. They wrote up a report basically saying how you can reduce cancer risk, and that was one of the recommendations that they made. So we need to consider, if you do want to eat meat, that's probably okay as long as it's a healthy form of meat. So again, we looked at this already. We're not going to go through this one again. As far as organic foods, again, that President's Cancer Panel that I just mentioned, they are recommending now that we should eat organic vegetables, and we'll take a look at where we probably should and where we may not need to eat organic. There's a chemical called BPA. Again, this group was very adamant that we need to get this chemical out of our food source. It's found in canned foods and certain plastics. So if you use plastic for, especially to drink out of, look for BPA free. If you're looking for canned food now, most of it has BPA in the lining of the can. So uh, you can try and find some organic stuff that has, it says BPA free lining, something like that. But you should definitely try and avoid that. Um, we'll talk about some of these other recommendations when we cover environmental health. Um, so the Dirty Dozen, these are vegetables and fruits that we should probably buy organic. So for the most part, these are vegetables and fruits that you eat the skin. So like you don't really generally peel an apple. You're eating the whole apple. Same thing with lettuce, cucumbers, blueberries. Um, whereas some of these other things are things that you, for the most part, these are all things that you peel, like an avocado or a pineapple or an onion, garlic. Eggplant's one there, and asparagus is one there. So they're the exceptions to the rule. But almost everything else, if you peel it, it's probably okay to eat conventionally. I mean, if it costs the same to buy organic, might as well get organic. But these are the things that is probably okay to buy conventional. If you're into that, look for that USDA organic sticker, or the non-GMO project. That's non-genetically modified organisms. Um, I'll probably do another slide on that. But we can probably talk a little bit more about GMOs. I'm not going to get into those right now. So just a couple pictures. Vegetables in abundance, obviously. This is again from Harvard. I would say for a 2,000 calorie diet, maybe 9 servings, or excuse me, 6 servings of vegetables every day. These do not count as vegetables. All right. Just because your hot pocket has a little bit of broccoli surrounded by all that saturated fat doesn't necessarily mean that it's good for you. Okay, those veggie chips are actually not a bad little snack. I use them. I probably shouldn't, but they're not potato chips, but they're still kind of potato chips. But it certainly doesn't count as one of our vegetables. If you choose to eat whole grains, these are the types of whole grains that you should go for. Steel cut oatmeal, you can buy that. It takes a while to cook, but if you get a pressure cooker, it works real well. Um, real brown rice. There's Eden Organic makes some pretty good pastas, very high in fiber, very high in protein. Quinoa, of course, is really good. Corn is actually considered a whole grain. If you do get bread, if you like bread, try and get the real whole grain bread. Most of the stuff that's marketed as whole grain really isn't whole grain. And again, that's the main problem with grains is that most of the stuff it's on the market is really junk. Uh, if you see this nutrition label to the top right here, a pretty good rule of thumb is if you look at the total carbohydrate, it says 26 grams. You want at least a 10-to-1 ratio between carbohydrate and fiber. So if this has 26 grams, we want at least 2.6 grams of fiber. So as long as we have that, it's probably okay. There's some shady things sometimes they do in processed food to add a little fiber back, but for the most part, again, if you choose to consume whole grains, this is what you should choose. These are not whole grains. These are the worst things that you can put into your body. Almost. I'm sorry. It's a little drastic, but it's certainly not good for you. The Quaker oatmeal actually isn't that bad. It's just mixed with a lot of sugar. But that bagel is pure white flour. Wonder Bread, pure white flour, and sugar. Look at this Lucky Charms thing. Whole grain guaranteed. The first ingredient is whole grain, which is true. It's whole grain oats, but this is candy. Look at all the sugar that's in there and all the chemicals. They are delicious, but it's certainly not a whole grain, and you should minimize your consumption. Take a look at this again. An example, blaring example of where marketing of food is just blatantly wrong and uh, very misleading. It's saying Trix is made with whole grain. If you look at this, um, it's got let's see, protein, 1 gram of protein, 10 grams of sugar, 1 gram of fiber, 27 grams of carb, 1 gram of fiber. So it certainly didn't pass our fiber test. And a cup of corn has 16 grams of protein, 12 grams of fiber, and 8 grams of fat. So the corn is much more nutritious. It's not the best grain out there, but it's pretty good. You don't digest all of the corn, but you digest most of it, and it's not the best grain, but it's pretty good. What Trix is a very heavily processed, what is probably a genetically modified grain, and then they mix it with chemicals and sugar, and then they market it as healthy as whole grain. It's kind of a shame. So you've probably seen the glycemic index before. Um, it's not perfect, but it's pretty good. Try and pick low GI foods. Things like basmati rice and vegetables and beans and pasta, oats, things like that. And skip out on the chips and the cakes and the ice cream. Potatoes, Harvard doesn't like potatoes. I don't think they're that bad, in moderation. Again, those red potatoes or black potatoes, the white potatoes are probably should avoid. I mean, watermelon's on there, but it's also got a lot of nutrients as well. So when you need some sweetness, some sugar, if you have a sweet tooth, go for watermelon rather than chocolate. So again, if you choose to eat animals, this is where you should get your sources from. Um, grass-fed organic beef, uh, free-range organic chicken, ostrich meat. I've eaten, I think, all of these, by the way. I don't eat meat anymore, but this is pretty much what I eat, or I've eaten every one of these at one point or another. Buffalo meat is actually pretty lean compared to beef. Ostriches too. So there's benefits to eating, you know, free range beef over conventionally raised beef. If anybody's interested, I can show you some articles. In fact, there's an article in the CAM file about that. Um, Game meat actually has some benefits. This is the kind of meat that you should definitely avoid at all costs. Those chickens in the top right corner, those are all chickens that are living in a chicken coop. It's pretty gross in there. They're covered in their own filth, and they need to be fed drugs and hormones to keep them growing quickly. In fact, I think the main reason why they give the drugs is to help them grow quicker, um, but also to help prevent disease from spreading rampantly throughout these things. The cows are fed corn rather than grass. Cows are supposed to feed for however however long there's been cows, they've always eaten grass up until somewhat recently, and there's some reasons why they feed the corn to them. Same thing with the pigs. They're kept in these barrels for most of their life, not barrels, but cages, and it's pretty stressful existence. So trying out free range stuff, that's definitely the way to go. Nuts, beans, all great sources of protein. Soy can be a little shady, but as long as you're eating tofu or tempeh, edamame, the whole soy sources, those are okay. But there's some shady soy things out there as well. Again, beans are great for you. Try and get cage-free shell eggs if you can. Seeds, of course. Um, just one serving of walnuts, like I think it's maybe 2 or 3 times a week, reduces your risk of cardiovascular disease by about 50%. So, just a handful of nuts every day, a quarter cup of nuts is what's recommended, and can really have tremendous benefits. This stuff, again, as bad as refined carbohydrates are, this is equally bad in the meat department because it's heavily processed meat, and this is the stuff that we should again avoid at all costs. Um, I'm going to do a whole nother thing on processed meats, so stay tuned for that. But this stuff you should probably avoid as much as possible. There's the official word that comes down from the national or the cancer research people is that this food, I don't want to use the term, it's unfit for human consumption, but they've almost said that. They said that until we know more, we should never consume this type of food. The peanut butter is the exception. It's got a lot of sugar in it, but there's better sources of protein out there than Skippy. Um, Fruits and vegetables, or excuse me, fruits in abundance, different colors. 3 servings a day is a good target, unless you have diabetes or you're obese, high blood sugar issue levels. You might want to consider eating more vegetables than fruits. I would say try and cut back on the natural sugars a little bit. As far as juice goes, just be careful with juice. No more than 1 serving of juice a day, and I think I would try and juice it myself rather than buy the juice in the supermarkets. Again, these do not count as fruits. Even if it says made with real fruit, they put a little bit of fruit juice on it and mix it with chemicals and sugar. So just never eat any of these things. Again, refined carbohydrates. Um, for those of you that like dairy, again, Harvard says dairy is not necessary. If you choose to consume dairy, um, again, organic, grass-fed cheese or dairy, I guess I should say. When the milking cows, when they're fed corn, it increases the output overall. But one of the ways that it does that is that it essentially waters down the milk, so it's less nutritious. So cows that again are fed on grass, which is what they're supposed to be fed on, the it's actually much more dense, much more full of nutrients. So just be careful sometimes when it's not organic. They're allowed to give the animals drugs as well. They do it to control infections and things like that. So there's some concern about stuff that's not organic. Or soy is good for you. Uh, Hemp milk, uh, almond milk, rice milk. We give our son rice milk. So you don't really have to get to get dairy. You can get your calcium from other sources. Um, Definitely stay away from this kind of junk. Processed cheese, Cheese Whiz, and those Kraft cheese singles. Among other things, they put I forget. I think they put aluminum in there, and it does something to the texture of the cheese. It makes it more palatable somehow. So the thing in the center, the group, the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. I think it was like a World Series or possibly the Indianapolis 500, something like that. They put these posters above every urinal in the stadium uh, because they're very adamant that all animal products should be eliminated from the human diet. So I don't know. It's a little extreme, obviously. I put it up there more for fun than anything else. But the other stuff you should definitely try and avoid. Again, the yogurt, it's not that bad, but that yogurt is probably filled with sugar, and it's certainly not organic. So just again, try and be careful about your sources. For those of us that have a sweet tooth, these are all pretty good sources. Sorbet is great. It's basically processed fruit mixed with sugar, and you need it in moderation, but at least there's no chemicals. Just try and stay away from chemicals. Try and stay away from sugar. You've read the Harvard information about children and artificial sweeteners, so take that into consideration as well. I think these Edie's fruit bars actually have artificial sweeteners in them, which is why I mentioned that. So again, just be careful, and then stay away from this stuff. Again, those blizzards, I know they're awesome. They're incredible. It's like $3 and you get a tub of ice cream. It's wonderful, but it's really just junk. It's really bad for you. That SpongeBob thing, it's just chemicals and sugar, really. So, the debate goes on about how dangerous this stuff is. I would say just avoid it. Maybe have it occasionally, but it definitely should not be a regular part of the diet. A little bit of tea, a cup or two of tea a day. Certainly, plenty of water. Not all four of those beers, but maybe one of those beers would be tasty after dinner one night. A glass of wine, perhaps, some juice, and I do use a juicer. I use it for my son, but you're better off getting your vitamins from whole fruits and vegetables, but the fruits do make it, or the juicer does make it a little bit easier to get up to that 9 servings every day. Any soda, diet or otherwise, should be eliminated from the diet as much as possible. I know people use it, people drink one or two a day and they think it's not that bad. I highly recommend that you get it out of your diet. It's an occasional treat maybe, but not every day, a couple cans a day. Those Starbucks things, again, those things are delicious, but they're probably about 500 calories. If you're actually exercising, the Gatorade isn't that bad, but you have to exercise quite a bit to get the need to have that much sugar and some of the other things. So just be careful with that. And then if you're cracking open that St. Ides, you're probably finishing that whole thing. So that's probably a little bit too much alcohol for one person. Again, I know these places are a little shady, or some of them might be, but when you have the craving for fast food, Elevation Burger, it's all organic, grass-fed beef. It's still junk food. It's still grease, but it's at least it's a little bit less guilt-free. Panera, I can get a veggie sandwich in there and a cup of black bean soup. I don't know. It's probably been sitting around for a while, the soup, but it's still, I don't know. It's an occasional thing. It's not something I do regularly. Chipotle, of course, has been getting a good reputation. Whole Foods, and then these are the places that you should definitely stay out of as much as possible. All right, exercise every day. Doesn't matter what you do, just do something, some type of physical activity, and there you go. Try and avoid this. Okay. I'm sorry if anybody got skeeved out by this. All right, I hope this was helpful. Take care.